actually, so I have presented in the last slot of a conference before. Has anybody else presented in the last slot of a conference before? Remember how that feels? Can we give Ellis an extra round of applause? Okay. You can use the lapel mic for sure.
Can you please use the yellow cube, Mike?
Do I get paid extra then?
You get paid twice.
You can have more muffins.
Yes.
Oh,
Times
okay.
2.
We will double your payment.
My payment of $0,
Yeah.
to be clear. Okay, so, it's not all the way big.
Is it not all the way?
Here we go.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, is this on? I can't
It's on.
hear myself.
Sounds great.
I just want to make sure people can hear me. So my presentation is called The History of They and the Current State of They Fairs, an analysis of comments about the singular they. So I am going to dive right into that. Oh, my name is Ellis Hernandez and I use they, them pronouns. So first I'll tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'll tell you the things, and then I'll tell you what I told you, because that's the best way for people to remember what you told them. So first of all, I'm going to talk about how attitudes towards using they as a singular pronoun have changed over time. I'm going to talk about how we can see those changes via looking at the history of they as a singular pronoun, different usage guides, dictionaries, survey responses, and comments from published authors. I'm going to argue that people seem to be more accepting of the queer they than the general they, and talk about the many arguments for and against the singular they, and finally assert that the singular they will prevail in the end. I would like to preface this presentation with a content warning. I will be reading comments from some transphobic people. There are no slurs, but there are some instances of uncomfortable language that you will probably dislike, but hopefully, rather than being upset, we can laugh at them. Humor, in my opinion, is a good way to deal with those things. So, brief history of they. Some of this is going to be repeated, as you said, last talk of the conference, very niche conference. Here we are. So hopefully we're not repeating too much. The earliest attestation for the singular they with an indefinite antecedent is from 1375 in a book called William of Parleen. I found out about this in the good old Oxford English Dictionary, and the exact quotation of that, if you haven't heard it, is something I'm not going to read in Old English. I could, but it sounds like a disaster, so I'll read the translation. It's, "Then quickly hastened each man on horse and foot, hunting with hounds all the high woods, till they came nearly, to tell the truth, to where William and his worthy dear friend were hiding together." So they, right there, happy friendly they. The earliest attestation for what we could argue is the non-binary they is from 1750. It's like a very long time ago. I'm very excited that I found out about this attestation. If Corey Stamper ever sees this, thank you, I love you forever. Corey Stamper is an amazing lexicographer who finds really cool citations for the singular they. This is from something called A Dissertation on Hermaphrodites by George Arnaud. And there's a couple of points in this dissertation where hermaphrodite is referred to with the singular they. Now, of course, we want to recognize how gender constructs in the 1750s were way different than they are now, and how hermaphrodite is, of course, no longer an accepted terminology, and thus that's problematic. We all know why that's problematic, but I would argue that it's still valuable to see this use of the singular they, because it is the first instance where, regardless of the difference of gender constructs and everything, it is they being used to refer to someone who is neither male nor female. So even if there's some problematic stuff, that's the thing. The quotation is, "They would have the parts of both sexes, each in particular, to have the genuine character which constitutes their essence." So that is the earliest, arguably, non-binary they. The earliest attestation of the general they with gender known but irrelevant is from 1950. Again, thank you, Corey Stamper, I love you forever. This is from Geraldine Bradshaw by Calder Willingham, and the quotation is, "I got in a fight," he said. "You mean somebody hit you?" "Yes, they landed a lucky one." And if you are familiar with the Oxford English Dictionary's blog post where they claim that the non-binary they occurred in 1950, this is actually the citation that they're referring to. So their article is a little bit misleading. If you were using that as a citation, you might want to be aware of that. This is the actual citation that they have, which is very valuable, but slightly different from what they were represented to be. If you know of anything older than these, please tell me. I want all of your cool citations. Something that I'm maybe hoping can cover this conference is a paper really detailing the history of the singular they, because I haven't seen a consolidated thing of that. So maybe someone wants to co-author with me. Okay, so there's different ways we can glean attitudes about using they as a singular pronoun. These are via usage guides, which can indicate what prescriptive scholars think about how you should use they, and maybe we could say that that's what prescriptive scholars think that people want to hear, what instructions people want to have about the singular they. We can also look at dictionaries and how they represent lexicographers' attitudes, which lexicographers tend to be descriptive-ish, at least. And these are important because the general population, when they're talking about the singular they, they're like, well, what does the dictionary think? And they'll type that into Google, and so dictionary representations of the singular they are very important. And of course, we can look at empirical studies on the singular they, which are hopefully indicative of what people in general think of the singular they, and then published authors' comments, which I would say are representative of popular perspectives about the singular they. So first of all, usage guides, we can zip through these. You're probably mostly familiar with them. The Chicago Manual Style 17 argues that they is fine in informal writing and speech. Totally cool, whatever they you want to use is fine. But in formal writing, they only accept the non-binary they. The Associated Press is very similar. They limitedly accept the singular they. They're like, nah, you really should reword it, and like they give specific examples of how you can reword it, but they're like, nah, if you need to use it, that's fine. And of course, if someone is non-binary, you should use it. The Purdue Owl actually has a whole page about how they is an awesome pronoun and you should use it all the time for everything, which is super great because a lot of undergrads look to that for advice. The American Psychological Association says that you should use the non-binary they, but instead of using the general they, reword your sentences. MLA is very similar, and I would like to point out that all of these acceptances of the non-binary they are very new. They're things that have occurred in the last 5-ish years from all of these style guides. So again, articles, the popular articles that you see that say, oh, APA's accepted they, it's not quite as awesome as the articles represent because they're very conditional acceptances of they. And this is where you can see that the queer they is being more accepted than the general they, which is kind of funny because the general they is already so ubiquitously used. So that's kind of an interesting thing to see from the usage guides. Dictionaries over the last 50 to 100 years have been including the singular they, just very descriptive, very boring. They're just like, yep, you can use they as a singular pronoun. Definition, that's it. Some of the dictionaries have usage notes about this, and I won't quote these to you. They just say how you can use they. We'll point out the American Heritage Dictionary. Who knows this dictionary? Any dictionary nerds? Just a handful of us? Okay. So the American Heritage Dictionary is infamous for being very prescriptive, and they had something for a long time called the usage panel, which was basically cishet old white men sitting around and saying how you should use language. Over time, the usage panel became a little bit more diverse. However, it was dissolved recently, thank the Lord Jesus Christ, and that is a good thing for working towards a more descriptive perspective on grammar. It was interesting to read the most recent usage note from the usage panel, however, because it gives an indication of how they attitudes have changed over time. So in the dictionary, interestingly enough, even though the usage panel rejects it, they include the singular they definition with the mention of non-binary individuals. And then they have this really long usage note that's like super judgmental about using singular they, and then they note that in 2015, which is the last time that the usage panel met to discuss the singular they said that they were kind of fine with non-binary they, but it was very skewed towards the younger usage panel members. So a panelist born before 1945, which is a lot of them, sadly, only 4% approved of the non-binary they, whereas 40% of the panelists who were born later approved of the non-binary they. So this is kind of a cross-sectional representation of how attitudes towards the singular they have shifted over time. Dictionary.com is super amazing. It strongly supports the singular they. They have all these great articles about it, and it's a great thing to point to. They have an article where at the end they're like, tell people to use singular they, the dictionary approves. And when you Google stuff about definitions, it's kind of questionable what like the Google box that pops up is from. It's kind of weird. Google itself doesn't have a dictionary, they just steal from other people, and it's not clear which dictionary specifically they're stealing from. But after that box that pops up, like a bunch of the first things are dictionary.com articles that are like, yay, use they! So that's super awesome. There's more dictionaries, but this is kind of a representative sample of what dictionaries tend to say about using they as a singular pronoun. So as far as research studies about the singular they go, there are lots of really great empirical studies, like eye tracking studies, that have been mentioned throughout the week so far. I'm just going to talk about two different studies. One is mine, and one is from Mittens et al. In 1970. Is anyone familiar with this study? One of my goals for this presentation is to give you citations that you didn't know about, so hopefully this is good. So they have 457 participants who did a survey about their acceptance of different grammatical structures. It was not a survey focused on the singular they, it was a survey looking into people's approval of different constructions in formal and informal speech and writing. So they could rate each of those 4 categories and whether or not they would approve of a construction in those contexts. But in their big list of constructions, they had the singular they, with an indefinite antecedent, of course, because it was 1970. But we can look at attitudes towards the singular they. Yay! I was so excited when I found this. So actually 72% of people in 1970 approved of they as a singular pronoun in informal speech, and 19% approved of it in formal writing, which, you know, that's nowhere near half. It's not a majority, but 19% is almost 20%, which is like a fifth of people a long time ago who approved of the singular they across all contexts. So 40% approved, or 42% approved on average across all the contexts. So that was pretty exciting. And looking at my research, moving on to that, I'm going to compare that percentage to what I found of approval. So in my own research study, I had 722 participants who did an online survey about the singular they and attitudes towards trans people, open response question, attitudes towards prescriptive grammar. Some of you may have taken this survey and heard me talk about it before. I have a lot of really, really cool data from it. I am going to talk about just the open response, which is like really uncomfortable for me because I'm a very quantitative person and this is a very qualitative based thing, but I'm gonna roll with it. If you're interested in my like super data focused stuff, let me know because I would love to share it with you. But in any case, on average across the context that I had in my study, 63% of people either approved or strongly approved of using they, and that is up 21% from the Mittens et al. Study in 1970. So comparing them is a little shaky because I had a very different scale than what they used, but we're still looking at approval of the singular they. So this is exciting to see numerically how those attitudes have increased. In my study, It's notable that 22.71%, oh, this does things when you touch it, okay. Yikes, does it go away? Okay. 22.71% of people in my study didn't care about the singular they. In their responses to my scale about singular they marked most of the boxes as like, yeah, whatever, neutral, I don't care. So only 15% of people disapproved or strongly disapproved of the singular they in the general context, and even less people disapproved of it in the queer context, which again points out that people tend to be, or as far as my research has demonstrated, people tend to be more accepting of the singular they in the queer context than in the general context. So the final indication of they attitudes, oh, I already said that. Oops, okay. The final indication of they attitudes that I would like to talk about is the difference between published authors' comments about the singular they and those of survey participants. I'm going to divide this up between anti-they comments and pro-they comments. So the first anti-they thing that I'm going to look at is the classic number agreement and confusion thing. This is a very prescriptive, very popular argument, and I would argue that it's a shade for people's prejudice against trans people, not just their feelings about grammar. The oldest citation for this argument that I am aware of is from Murray in 1795, who said that pronouns must always agree with their antecedents and the nouns for which they stand in gender, number, and person. Then Murray has a big list of errors and corrections where they're like, someone said they here, and you should say he. So that's the oldest citation I have for that. And reflective of that, I had a survey participant who said, they is a plural pronoun. Oh, this is a transphobic comment. They is a plural pronoun. It is only properly used in the plural. If a new gender-neutral singular pronoun is needed, it's not. One can be developed. However, wasting time worrying about offending some portion of the 0.6 of the population that identifies as transgender is totally unacceptable. Something I would like to note as I go into the survey participants is there's a ton of typos. So like, identifies as is what they actually put. When you see typos in survey comments, that's what they are. It's really funny because a bunch of them are talking about like prescriptive grammar stuff, and then they make a bunch of errors about that. So another anti-they thing is attacks on intelligence. This is very classy. White 1880 is the first attack on intelligence for the singular they I could find. They said, even John Ruskin has written such a sentence as this, but if a customer wishes you to injure their foot or disfigure it, you are to refuse their pleasure. How Mr. Ruskin could have written such a sentence of that, or how, it having been written, it could have passed by an intelligent proofreader, I cannot surmise. This is reflected in popular authors' writing. Dahl 2013 in The Atlantic said, the singular they is an ear-hurting, eye-burning, soul-rattling, mind-bending, syntactic folly. So these are great, great arguments against the singular
They
they.
ravished my soul.
Another argument against the singular they is a preference for neopronouns. The first really developed argument I saw arguing for neopronouns against the singular they is from Armis in 1884. They have a big long thing, but the highlight is the English language with all its boasted copiousness is still in want of a word, and hardly a day passes that anyone speaking the language does not feel the want. The word is a word that shall express personality without denoting gender, a word that can be used in place of either he or she. This is a very lofty need. Then they say, cannot some of our scholars devise a word that shall predicate nothing whatsoever about gender that can be used indifferently for he or she? So, oh, and they talk about that in there. So, participants often reflected this desire for neopronouns instead of singular they. One example is, I personally don't like it, I find it confusing, I would prefer a completely new word. It's easily distinguishable from they plural. This second comment is long, so I'll skip over it, read my slides later, but they say some funny shit about being a gay rights activist, and then they shit on they. So that's fun. Another argument against they is morality issues and transphobia. This is very gross. If you haven't heard this quotation, I am so sorry to expose your ears to it. Schreier 2018 said, "For those with a religious conviction that sex is both biological and binary, God's purposeful creation, the singular they involves sacrilege, no less than bowing to idols in the town square." Woo! Isn't that fun? Survey participants had similar things to say, like they are a bunch of whiny, self-entitled idiots.
Thanks for using my pronoun right, though.
So moving on to the pro-they arguments. By the way, this is not an exhaustive list of arguments. These are just ones that I've seen a lot of, so there's more, as there always is when we're talking about research. Okay, pro-they arguments. It's been around forever and famous authors use it, and this argument is in many of the many pro-they articles that we've seen pop up in the last few years. So I love Corey Stamper, which you might have noticed. She said, "The singular they has been in consistent use in English prose since the late 1300s, even as grammarians and language writers rail against it as ungrammatical and sloppy. The written record bears this out. The epicene they has been used by Chaucer, Shakespeare, Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, George Bernard Shaw, and dozens of other writers who are both grammatical and precise." And actually, a lot of my participants said stuff like that as well. This one is funny. They, as a gender-neutral third-person pronoun, is at least 20 years old. If speaking, it will always fulfill that role. So, I mean, they're right. We've got a lot more than 20 years. Another argument is that language changes. I am very low out of time, so I'm just going to rush through this real fast. Read my slides later. People say he or she is awkward. So they use that as an argument against singular they. And another argument is that neopronouns don't work. I would like to point out that in this argument, I would like to thank Dennis Barron for everything he has ever written, because he is pronoun God. And if you don't know him, you should follow him on Twitter and read everything he's ever written. Okay.
Is that the conference remotely? Maybe not right now. Whoa.
Okay. Acceptance of trans people, dictionary.com, like I mentioned earlier. This is a great argument for why we should use they as a singular pronoun. I like this comment from someone. "Using they about someone if they haven't stated another preference most likely won't hurt anyone, and trans/non-binary folks could be spared some of the daily, spared, I think is what they meant to say, spared some of the daily pain of being misgendered." So that's a really nice comment and a good point. Another great argument is who cares? And one of my participants said, "I've heard they used in that context for, 63 years that I can remember anyway, no big deal. There are much more threatening conversations taking place out there, and most of them have hideous grammar." So, who cares is another funny argument. So in conclusion, what I told you today is that attitudes towards singular they have shifted over time. We can see this through looking at the history of they, usage guides, dictionaries, surveys, responses, published authors' comments, and other ways that I haven't talked about today. People seem to be more accepting of the queer they than the general they, and there are many arguments that we've talked about for and against they. Published authors' arguments for and against they tend to reflect participants' comments about the singular they, and more research has been done and will be done as we've talked about this week, which is super awesome. And finally, the singular they will prevail. Woo! So, thank you. I would like to acknowledge again Corey Stamper, Dr. Dennis Barron, and then this super awesome article, Bodine, 1975, which pointed me towards a lot of really great resources. You probably all know that article, but it's awesome. So, yeah, questions?
Great. Questions for Ellis? Can I say at the outset that listening to people complain about singular they always makes me feel so mighty.
Yes!
Like we are soul crushing, bowing to idols in the town square, 10 guys in trench coats. That's fantastic. Lee.
Can I say that, like, something I really learned here is that I'm actually 10 whiny, self-entitled idiots in a trench coat. That's a lot of power.
Yeah.
A lot of whining.
Yeah.
You, Eddie.
Any other comments or ethics?
I just want to share this comment that was just posted to the Slack. It's not a question. It's in the random channel for anybody who wants to check it out. Laurestine says, anyone up for a trip to the town square to bow to some trans idols?
Yes! Yes! I am down for bowing to trans idols.
Absolutely.
Yes. Susan Stryker, specifically.
I like that.
Kirby.
Good job.
Thank
Really
you.
great. So, in some of the comments that I got, because I had a similar, our methodologies are very similar which is great, because we love to replicate each other's results. So some of the comments that I got, I didn't, the difference is that you specifically asked them about singular they, and I asked them like, what's going on in my sentences? Not gonna tell you anything, and so people just spontaneously, like, they were like, there was singular they. So they noticed, but one thing that I got is that I got a lot of people talking about, one, like trying to place themselves in the language change of like, I know this is changing and I'm trying to keep up, or I know this is changing and I hate it, or I know this is changing and I'm helping, and I'm wondering if you got comments like that. And then my second question, which is only semi-related, is...
Can I answer your first question
please.
first? I have ADHD, so yeah.
Go for it.
Oh, I can only remember so many things at once. So yes, I did get comments like that. The comments that I quoted here are not necessarily representative of everything that my participants had to say. They're just representative of participants who talk about arguments for and against the singular they. So I definitely did get those comments, especially from some very pious people who are like, look at me helping the transgenders. Yeah, so I definitely got that. But I also got it from non-binary people who are going along with the language change.
My follow-up question. So that question is sort of, you know, people are commenting in a descriptive way, sort of in this folk linguistic way of like, it seems like something is happening in the world. And then the other thing that I see happening, and I'm wondering if you get any of this, is people saying that asking for singular they is doing prescriptivism to them, like we're doing reverse prescriptivism to the cis. And I'm wondering if that's something that you found in your thread, because I think a lot of your sources that you're pulling from are sort of these like formal texts, but I'm wondering if you are seeing any of that sort of like don't tell me what to do attitude.
Yeah, I do mostly pull from formal texts, articles that you know, published authors have written. I do not have the emotional wherewithal to read angry Tumblr posts.
Don't do that, yeah.
Yeah, no. But I have seen, in my participants' responses, which were also exhausting to read, some of the time anyway, I did see a couple that were like, this is reverse prescriptivism, you can't tell me what to do. But there was actually not a lot of that, which I was glad. How much of that did you get?
The times that I've gotten that have frequently come from linguists.
Same, yeah.
But you know, cis ones, obviously.
Yeah.
So I have gotten this from non-linguists, but in a very weird roundabout way and sort of in person, sort of like my anecdata, you know.
Yeah.
But it's a weird pushback because I mean, there's various reasons it's weird. I was just curious how much of it you'd seen and also how it would sort of fit into the narrative thread that you're building of like the way that the meta commentary is shifting over time. Do you think at some point everybody's going to get over it, or are they just going to like change their arguments to use different rhetorical tools to be like mad online?
I mean, it's hard to predict the future. As much as I wish that linguists were psychics, we are not. But
Speak for yourself.
What?
Yeah.
Speak for yourself.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not a psychic anyway. The short answer is that I don't know. I have not anything that's necessarily backed by like data. And my personal opinion is that people will get over it, and as my research advisor says, all the old people will die and then everything will be fine. So that's my personal opinion. And of course we can look at the singular you and see that as an example. So.
Other questions or comments for Alice? We have a couple minutes, right? Aiden?
Sure, if no one else. Okay. Hi, that was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this to us. So I've also received similar, so I asked people like, in response to a student, with what pronoun do you use, and I asked them their opinion. So I received a lot of similar things that you did, and probably
That's good to know.
Yeah, so it's like applicable, right? And same with Kirby, lots of things. So one thing that I want to do when I have time, I'm never gonna have time, is to take that qualitative data and like match what they actually like used in their responses. So is that something that you might do, is go through that qualitative data and like see what their attitudes were to see if that matches up?
Yes. I really, really, really want to do that. I'm working on replicating my study this summer, but I'm behind because I'm not going to attribute moral qualities to my behavior. I have had slower efforts than I meant to have working on my thesis over the summer. So I am buckling down on that now, and the more important thing for me is to replicate my study than to get to the qualitative stuff, because I am much more of a quantitative person. But if I have time, I do want to analyze the qualitative data with Luke, which is the linguistic inquiry of word count software. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's super dope. And I want to compare Luke results to their survey responses. So that's what I want to do. Whether or not it happens will be a different question.
Thank you.
Hey, I just want to give some love to old people who I love, and just to clarify the reference that was to a comic. There's a comic that sort of makes that point that as generations age out, language changes. So
yeah,
I just wanted to make some modification to that.
Yeah. That's in case it wasn't obvious, that's hyperbole. I do love our trans elders. I respect them, and I absolutely understand why they have the feelings that they have, and absolutely am glad for their contributions to the changes in attitudes towards trans people, especially our elders who are trans women, especially our elders who are trans women of color, and that is very important as well.
Taking Brooke as a keynote.
Thank you.
Great. We can go a little bit over on account of the...
We have 4 minutes
4
left
minutes
actually in the
left.
session.
So things are things that I can actually translate into the corporate space in terms of arguments. Would you at any point put these up, because we were talking about like a FAQ, frequently asked questions, and I feel like pretty much your entire presentation, if it was just like put with links to all of the citations you made with all the different dictionaries and like, that would be extremely useful and portable. So if you're open to that, I would love to see it.
Yeah, definitely. That makes me really happy because I do not have the attention span for like application stuff, but I love the people who do, and so hearing that someone wants to use my research to do that is like very exciting. So I absolutely can do that. I record all of my talks and post them on YouTube because people are like, oh, I want to see it, and then they can't see it. So I will be tweeting that link. I will also post my slides. You are more than welcome to use them, and if you want my further thoughts about other arguments, other citations I have, I would be more than happy to share those as well. So, do people want my citations generally?
Yes.
Is that something I should put in a Google Doc?
Yes.
Okay. I will do that. Follow me. Is anyone not on Twitter? Okay, I'll get your email address so I can email it as well. Okay, because I want to make sure. One of the cool things about this conference is how much we can share resources and cite each other and share our data, and so I want to make sure that anything that I have had to say is going as well, which again is like super exciting to me. There's so many conferences where you like go and do your thing and you're like, will anyone ever even remember this? Let's see, I don't know. But I feel so excited that I definitely think we're gonna remember each other and use the stuff that we've learned. So as the last regular talk, thank you all so much for being amazing, and thank you to the organizers for facilitating this awesome